Hello and welcome. It's time for French Politics here on France 24. I'm Mark Perlman.
And I'm Molly Hall. Thanks for joining us. France's presidential campaign is heating up, and Mark and I will be your guides all the way to the Élysée. Coming up in today's show, François Fillon stands defiant. The embattled conservative candidate refuses to bow out of the race.
And from unknown underdog to frontrunner, we'll take a close look at Emmanuel Macron, the surprise candidate.
Plus, we're going to break down the powers of the French presidency. That's up next on the Political Brief.
So France's presidential election is less than 2 months away, and this campaign will already go down in history as one of the craziest campaigns ever. First, let's focus on the man who was supposed to be France's next president, François Fillon.
Dogged by allegations he used public funds to pay his wife and children for jobs they never did, the conservative refuses to back down.
Once called Mr. Nobody, Francois Fillon was a mild-mannered prime minister, often overshadowed by the president he served under, Nicolas Sarkozy. That all changed when he won a decisive victory in the conservative Les Républicains party primary last November. The win catapulted him into the spotlight. His platform, tougher security and pro-business reforms, resonated with voters, and he shot up in the polls, easily becoming the front runner. But a small headline in the Canard Enchaîné in January would turn into a major political scandal for Fillon. The weekly paper alleged that Fillon arranged taxpayer-funded jobs for his wife and 2 of his children, but that they, in fact, did no work. Dubbed Penelope Gate, the scandal has taken on a life of its own. Fillon vowed he would step aside if a formal investigation was opened.
There is only one thing that could prevent me from running, if my honor was affected, if I were under investigation.
But now that he's facing a formal investigation for embezzlement, he's vowed to stay in the race.
I will not give up. I will not withdraw. I will go to the very end because, beyond just me, it's democracy that's at stake.
With his approval rating plummeting, his party is in crisis mode. Many members are now urging him to step aside. His campaign has suffered several high-profile defections. On Sunday, demonstrators turned out in Paris to protest against political corruption, while Fillon held a rally across the capital in an effort to try and salvage his candidacy. While Fillon continues to fight for his political life, his party has no plan B. Alain Juppé, who was the runner-up in the primary, has said he won't step in if Fillon steps down. With less than 50 days to go before the election, it looks like the once certain shoo-in to be the next French president won't make it past the first round of voting.
Well, Fillon's financial scandal has sapped his support in opinion polls. The latest numbers put him third behind the far-right's Marine Le Pen and the centrist Emmanuel Macron, that for the first round of voting intentions. As for the second round, well, it is Emmanuel Macron who comes out on top. And it's interesting, Mark, because, of course, we do have Marine Le Pen, who is also facing her own legal troubles, but that has not hurt her campaign as it has Fillon's.
No, absolutely. This is really very interesting because Marine Le Pen has been riding high in the polls. The reason is simple. Her and her party have been accused numerous times of impropriety. They've been in court and so on, but it has never hurt them. The reason is because they're saying we're against the system. The system is going after us because this time we may win, and certainly the polls show that in the first round at least she would come out on top.
All right, well, this is where the candidates stand then in the polls. Let's see where they stand on the issues. On the far left, we've got Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who would like to bring in a public spending, raise it actually to 173 billion euros, like a new labor law and an increase to the minimum wage, bringing it to 1,300 per month.
Well, raising public expenditure by 173 billion euros means you're breaking with European Union rules. But Mélenchon doesn't really care. Actually, he says he wants to do away with austerity. He says we need to provide affordable care, education, health to the French, and this is the time to do it.
All right, well, let's see what we have in terms of socialists. Of course, it is Benoît Hamon, who would also like to bring in a new labor law. He would like to establish a universal basic income, as well as exit from nuclear power.
Well, his big proposal is this basic universal income. It's also a major public expenditure. Some are saying it's 300 billion euros. He says it's less, but he feels encouraged. He says it's the future. And by the way, the capitalist symbol, Bill Gates, is also in favor of such a revenue.
All right, let's cross to the far right now. We've got Marine Le Pen of the National Front. Now, she would like to organize a referendum on France's European Union membership, as well as hire 1,500 police and security forces and make citizenship a privilege and ensure a national priority for French citizens.
Well, Molly, organizing a referendum on the so-called Frexit is a major gamble because the polls show the French are not in favor of leaving the European Union or the euro. And when you do a referendum, there's always a risk because voters might want to punish the person asking the question than actually answering the question.
Indeed. Well, now in the center, we've got candidate Emmanuel Macron. The surprise candidate is the favorite to sit in the Élysée Palace come this May.
Emmanuel Macron's 2014 rise into government came as a surprise. Neither a politician nor a member of the Socialist Party, he had one objective:
removing the solid barriers within our economy.
Macron attended France's prestigious ENA, the national administration school for anyone looking at a potential career in the civil service, before heading into investment banking at Rothschild. In 2012, though, he took a pay cut to join the newly victorious President François Hollande's administration, working as a close presidential aide. 2 years later, he'd become the Minister for the Economy and Industry, replacing Arnaud Montebourg. The two men couldn't have been more different. Macron's predecessor was a Socialist Party stalwart, but the new minister rejected core tenets, like the 35-hour work week. He even favored trading on Sunday and freeing up competition for coach companies, two major features of the pro-business law bearing his name that was forced through Parliament last year. Come spring 2016, and Macron announced his latest project, the creation of his own political movement, En Marche. In November, he declared he would run for the French presidency under the banner of a centrist movement. And since then, Macron has made an unexpected sharp rise in the polls. Macron unveiled his budget plans for the country last week. He says he wants to create a universal pension system, put an end to nepotism in parliament, and hire more than 10,000 new police workers. With the mainstream parties, both on the left and on the right, in crisis, Macron now finds himself as a favorite to win the presidency this May.
So then on the evening of May 7th, France will have a new president. But what exactly does that job entail? Well, Florence Villeminot is here to tell us what it involves. And Flo, so what powers does the French president have?
Well, the French president has a lot of power. In fact, political scientists say that the French president has more power than the leaders of most other democracies, whether it's in the UK, Germany, or even arguably in the US. Now, a strong president is a key feature of the Fifth Republic, which was ushered in by Charles de Gaulle with the Constitution of 1958, and it greatly expanded the powers of the presidency. And essentially, the idea was to have a strong leader in France that would call the shots and especially avoid the parliamentary paralysis that had plagued the country for years before that.
But Florence, France is not a purely presidential system. Some would call it a semi-presidential system.
Indeed, France is a hybrid system, and what's interesting is the French president gets the best of both worlds. Just like a prime minister in a parliamentary democracy, the president has supreme executive authority and essentially drives the nation's policy-making agenda. But on the top of that, the president is the head of state, directly elected by the people, and can't be voted out of power by the parliament.
All right, well, then if the president is the boss, what does the prime minister do?
Well, the prime minister is appointed by the president and shares executive authority. Essentially, he or she is in charge of defending the government's policy in front of the parliament and also running day-to-day affairs. Essentially, the prime minister runs the ship and serves the pleasure of the president, who's really the one in charge.
Right, and he is especially in charge of his own turf, defense, and foreign policy.
Indeed, as commander-in-chief of the French armed forces, the president is the guarantor of France's territorial integrity and national independence. Essentially, ultimately, it's the president who decides whether to send troops on the ground, and also it's the president who ultimately decides whether to unleash France's nuclear power. On top of that, the president represents France on the international stage, essentially negotiating, ratifying treaty, appointing ambassadors, etc.
But Flo, if we've seen really the president with so much power, have there been calls for any constitutional reform?
There have, because currently France's legislative body is considered one of the weakest in the democratic world, because the parliament can force the resignation of the prime minister, but it has relatively little power when it comes to the president. And not only that, the president can dissolve the parliament at any time and completely bypass it altogether by putting together a referendum or something like that to enact a law. There have been calls to usher in a sixth republic with a new constitution that would be more balanced, because critics say that currently the French president, the président de la République, is kind of a temporary absolute monarch of the ancient regime, which is pretty ironic for a country that fought so hard to get rid of its king.
All right, Flo, well, thank you very much for breaking down the presidential powers at the Élysée. And that does bring us to the end of our show. But for more, you can always head to our website. It's France24.com.
And we'll now leave you with some images from the campaign trail, and we'll see you next week here on the Political Brief.
Middle East Matters, presented by Sanam Chantier.
Keep up to date on the latest from the Middle East. We bring you political, economic, and cultural events from the region in this weekly Middle Eastern program.
Middle East Matters on France 24 and France24.com.